it was scary because, wherever you go, there you are, whatever limiting beliefs that you have, right? So imposter syndrome, doubt, confusion, they all follow you into wherever you go next. So my mother-in-law used to say, wherever you go, there you are. And it's true for making the leap from corporate, but it's also your ticket to the C-suite. I mean, you're in control. You get to call the shots. You get to do what you want to do, work when you want to work with who you want to work with.
You are listening to the podcast From Now to Next, the podcast that empowers women to get seen, get heard, and get promoted. I'm your host, Erica Rooney, and I empower women to break through the glass ceiling by busting out of their sticky floors, those pesky limiting beliefs that hold us back. Today, I have a fellow glass ceiling breaker, Deb Boulanger, who is the founder and CEO of The Great Do-Over, and she also is the host of the podcast, Life After Corporate. You guys are going to love hearing what she has to say. So Deb, thank you for being here today.
It's my pleasure, Erica. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I love it. So Deb, tell me a little bit about who you are and how The Great Do-Over came to be.
Yeah, so it was a way of me getting out of my sticky floors and glass ceilings, actually. So the Great Do-Over was my personal reinvention. Actually, it was a complete do-over, physically, emotionally, spiritually, career-wise, when I left the corporate world 10 years ago and decided that I wanted to create success on my terms. And I was also a single mom. And I wanted to be there for my son. I was recently divorced. So all of that led me to rethink my career goals and who was I at this point in my life, what was the impact that I wanted to make. And that was the birth of The Great Do-Over.
Oh my gosh. So all sorts of life changes.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just dive all in. That seems very scary to me as someone who's in corporate, and I have those lovely golden handcuffs that, that regular paycheck. How did you find the courage to do that?
Yeah, I think, it was that I lost passion for my job. I had risen to ranks in the company that I never imagined. I had never intended to climb up the corporate ladder, but I was always passionate about solving problems. And when I saw an opportunity, I would ask, can I do that? And the answer was usually yes. And then it came a time where I was facing burnout. My career was about launching service offerings to the corporate world. So I came from technology advisory services. My job was to find the gap in the market, create a service offering that was a high ticket service offering that was easy to sell for the sales force. And I loved doing that. So I had no fear about launching a business because I had all of that experience mostly the prior 10 years of launching service offerings. So I knew how to do that. And it was scary because, wherever you go, there you are, whatever limiting beliefs that you have, right? So imposter syndrome, doubt, confusion, they all follow you into wherever you go next. So my mother-in-law used to say, wherever you go, there you are. And it's true for making the leap from corporate, but it's also your ticket to the C-suite. I mean, you're in control. You get to call the shots. You get to do what you want to do, work when you want to work with who you want to work with. So it will really force you to face some of those inner demons and overcome them once and for all.
Yeah. So one of my questions, I think, is, and you touched on it a little bit, that these sticky floors follow you, but do they look different? Did they feel different from when you were in corporate and when you were on your own?
Well, I don't think there's so much of a sticky floor in entrepreneurship as the internal glass ceiling, right? So it's really the limiting beliefs. And I'm a huge fan of Pat Pearson, and I had interviewed her on my podcast probably the first year we launched the podcast, which was 2 years ago. She's the author of Stop Self-Sabotage, and we all have an inner deserve level. And our inner deserve level is kind of cemented into place. Not cemented into place, but it gets firmly established by the time we're like 7 years old. And it has to do with permissions from the past. What is okay for you, what is right about you, what are your beliefs about money, what are your beliefs about success, what are your beliefs about being good enough. And so those kind of follow you around, and you can't succeed beyond your inner deserve level. And I think that gets amplified once you're on your own, because it's you and it's you and it's you. There's no one else to point the finger at. There's no one else to uh, not necessarily blame, but there's no one else who's going to make the decisions for you. There's no one that's going to show up for you. So there's a lot of, I find with my clients, especially in the launch lab, which is the first place that women go once they make the leap from corporate, which is, who am I in this new role? Who are my ideal clients? What is my offer? How do I position myself in a crowded market? Because most of my clients are coaches or consultants. Mm-hmm. And how do I put myself out there? And that's the biggest hurdle, I think, once you make the decision to leave the corporate world, is how do I put myself out there?
And that's a great question, I think, even for people who aren't leaving corporate, especially women who are often overshadowed in boardrooms by men.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's tease out the difference between self-confidence and self-esteem, right? So self-confidence comes from doing. We've always had we've all experienced what Brene Brown calls those FFTs, right? Those F in first times, your first time presenting to the boardroom, your first time in an executive leadership position, your first time presenting from the stage. And there's a lot of things that rattle our nerves in those situations. Maybe you do a lot of prep, but once you successfully get past that first time, and you lived through it, and you probably likely succeeded your way through that first experience, then that's what builds confidence, right? Confidence comes from doing. Absolutely. Self-esteem is the unconditional positive regard just for being who you are. And I think that is where most women struggle. So I think women, and I came across this thought last year as I was thinking about why women hold themselves back. And I think we're operating under a conditioned set of lowered expectations. So there are exceptions to every rule, but for the most part, I believe that women were raised not to be leaders. It's not that our moms and dads said, go forth and conquer. You can be president of a company one day, or you can be president of the United States. Those aren't the things that are told to us. We're not told those things. Boys are told those things. Go out there, conquer, go do it, succeed, be the boss. And women aren't. And there's also what's modeled for us. So for some of us, in my case, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. She didn't have a job. And so when it came time to go to college, it was like, well, I'm really good with kids. Maybe I'll go be a teacher, right? So for many of us, we're left to our own devices to figure out our career journey, to figure out our path through college, to figure out our path through the corporate world. And Lord knows there's not a significant or sufficient number of mentors for women in the corporate world of this is how you navigate how to be in the boys club. And here's how you navigate being the only woman around the table. And so I think it's shifting and changing the last couple of years, but I don't think the needle is moving far enough or fast enough. And that's why I believe many women are choosing, because of the experience that they've had the last couple of years during going through the pandemic, is I like the flexibility. I want a company who allows me to work from home. I want to be present in my kids' lives. And so women are making bigger demands, and they're also being more powerful negotiators when it comes to compensation.
Which I think is huge. I'm a big advocate for equal pay, as I'm sure, and I know you are, but it is much more challenging for women to go in and ask for what they deserve because of this fear of the no, and the fear of rejection, and the fear of making it difficult or uncomfortable for someone else, because that, true to what you were saying, is not what we were taught to do. We were taught to make people comfortable, to make it nice, to serve others, help others. And when we ask for something that we believe might put them in a tough spot, we don't want to do it. Where boys are just like, hey, give me 10 grand more. Why not? There's no rhyme or reason to the ask.
So, and this is where women in corporate and women entrepreneurs share the same thing. It's that we undervalue our impact.
Absolutely.
And so I'm on a mission to close the equity gap for women entrepreneurs. And if we thought it was bad in corporate with 79, 80 cents to the dollar, in entrepreneurship, it's 30 cents to the dollar. So the undervaluing, it's because, and gets back to self-esteem. It's because your self-esteem gets all caught up in your self-worth. And when you're negotiating for a salary, or when you're establishing your prices for your services, you're all caught up in, well, what am I worth? And it's not about you. And if we can just take us out of the equation and look instead, and I coined this term last year called return on advantage. What is the return on advantage that your company or your client gets from the impact you make in the company or on the lives of the people or the companies that you work with? So if you focus more on your return on advantage, and you focus on the impact you make, then it takes the self-esteem issue off the table, and you're really focusing on the value of your talents.
I love that. And I think, and I know myself, I have done this, right? If somebody's like, could you please review my resume? I'll give you $100, right? I'm like, oh, no, don't worry about it, because it takes me 5 minutes to do. And I think it's not a big deal. But that is a service that people pay a lot of money for. And I think it's understanding that just because that is something that is easy for us, because we are trained and skilled, we could still and should still charge for that.
Absolutely. 1000%. You're spot on.
Yeah.
You're spot on.
Yeah. For you, Deb, I love this, because you are doing the important work of getting women to understand their worth and their return on advantage. For you personally, what sticky floors did you have to work through yourself?
By sticky floors, do you mean like procrastination, perfectionism? What constitutes a sticky floor? The things that prevent you from taking action?
For me, it is the things that prevent you from taking action, be that imposter syndrome, perfectionism, maybe you're stuck in a toxic relationship or a toxic behavior. All of those things.
Yeah. So I think perfectionism and procrastination are two sides of the coin, right? And resistance is part of that as well. And they're all fear-based, right? So all of this is based on fear of not being good enough, fear of making the wrong decision, fear of not being accepted, fear of holding a party and nobody shows up, all of those kinds of things. And it's tricky in entrepreneurship because you can hide behind that, right? It feels like fake progress. So the perfectionism piece will force you to keep getting another credential when you're perfectly credentialed enough to do what you need to do. Or it will force you to create a course or a program and not launch it until it's perfect, when the best way to launch a course or program is very imperfectly, and to deliver it live and get a lot of feedback in a beta setting before you ever record the beautiful videos and get the learning platform and deliver it in a more consistent way. So when I first launched the Launch Lab for Women Entrepreneurs, I did it in a really scrappy way. I showed up on Zoom. I created teaching modules. I delivered them live. We had conversations. And now the Launch Lab has been, I still coach live every single week, but it's all pre-recorded. And it's such a linear journey for women who are leaving corporate, that they go step by step, and it builds their confidence along the way so that they don't have that issue of they still have perfectionism, procrastination, honestly. I mean, it's just going to show up no matter what. It's a matter of asking yourself, how much do I really want it? What do I want and how much do I really want it? And why won't I show up in such a way that I'd actually get it?
Part of what I do when I work with the women that I work with is I ask them to name it, question it, and then shift it. Because I don't believe that these sticky floors ever truly go away. If
No.
you really struggle with perfectionism, you will probably always have perfectionism in your life. But as you are able to recognize where it shows up, when it shows up, how it shows up, then you can say, okay, let me just take a beat. Erica, you're going through this bout of perfectionism right here. It doesn't have to get to that level. And then question it. Is it true? Is it helpful? What's the worst that could happen? Right?
Yeah.
Usually not much.
Right.
And then
I'm a
shift
huge
that
fan
mindset.
of that.
Yeah.
Shift that mindset. I mean, we forget how powerful we really are. And I'm a huge fan of Byron Katie. The work of Byron Katie really changed my life. And it's called The Work, and it's the inquiry. Is it true? Can I be absolutely sure it's true? What happens to me when I believe the thought? Who am I? What do I do or don't do? How does that feel? And who would I be without that thought? What would I be doing? How would I be showing up instead? And how would that feel? And then we flip the thought around. But the problem is, Erica, is that most of us are walking around unconsciously and not even aware of the automated pilot, those that automated thinking that's really driving our bus, that's really driving our actions and responsible for our results.
Yeah, you have to get to this moment of self-realization. In each instance, too.
Yeah.
In each instance, I was telling my husband this story the other day. I went to a keynote speaking boot camp and I was super pumped about going. And I showed up. I didn't know anybody. It was my first time. And I walked into the room and very quickly realized that everyone there knew each other. They had been doing this for years, and that I was the tiniest fish in a pond full of whales. And I immediately was like, what am I doing here? I don't know enough. I shouldn't be here. And immediately those questions just started bubbling up. It's an automatic reaction. But then I had that little light bulb moment of everyone had to start with one of these, Erica. So you are you're starting where you're starting, and this is it for you. So you've got to push through it. You've got to push through the uncomfortableness. But you have to shift from the unconscious to the conscious. And then that's when you can drive forward and really make the progress on the growth.
Yeah. And so awareness is the very first step. What am I thinking? Because, your thoughts are creating your reality. They're what's keeping you stuck, like you say, on the sticky floor. And, that was the process in the Great Do-Over. The Great Do-Over was really birthed out of a 10-day meditation retreat where I was silent meditation retreat where, there was no one but me and me, me and my thoughts. Right. And there's nothing like sitting on a meditation cushion for like 6 hours a day in 45-minute stints to create an awareness of what goes on in your mind.
Wow. Yeah. Then you come up with the Great Do-Over, which I love, because when you are doing something like leaving corporate America and you are creating your own business, that is not just a job shift. It's not moving from one corporate to another. It is a total makeover / do-over. Yeah, because you are taking on all those roles and responsibilities of a CEO, and it is a totally different mindset that you have to have. What is, in your mind, the sticky floor that you see most of the women that you work with go through when they enter your program?
Yeah, just fear of talking to strangers. The first thing we do in the Launch Lab is we do market research. And in order to develop a service offering that has demand in the market, you want to find what that demand is before you start building supply. And too many women actually make the mistake of feeling like they don't know enough, they're not ready. And so they're very susceptible to signing up for all these marketing courses and sales courses or online programs about social media, and they don't yet have a value proposition. So before you market yourself or before you start trying to get new clients, you have to understand what is the lane that you own. And so that, I think, develops a lot of fear, because you have to talk to people who you don't know and who don't know you. And you have to ask them, what is it you're caring most about now? What's hard about that for you?
Well, and you mentioned earlier the fake progress. And that really, I was like, oh, I've done that before, because I have absolutely just been like, okay, if this is what I'm going to do, I need to take a course on it first. And it gives you a tangible thing that makes you feel like you're doing something, when in reality, in the entrepreneurial space, you actually have to produce.
You have to get clients, full stop. You're not an entrepreneur if no one's paying you. Right. So the fake progress is, well, let me build my website. Let me get a logo. Let me register my LLC. Let me, get another credential or take another online course. And the first thing you need, and we're talking about this inside the Launch Lab right now, because we have a program called Standout Webinars, which is, how do you speak and convert clients when you speak? Because everyone has an opportunity to speak in front of a group of people at some point in their career. And if you're an entrepreneur, you're a coach or a consultant, it's the lifeblood of your business. People need to discover you in order to hire you. So you can't be invisible and be discoverable at the same time. So you have to put yourself out there. And that's one of those sticky floors where people resist that. And they resist it because they don't know what to say. And so one of the things that we work on is what's your message and how are you standing out? How are you disrupting the narrative? How are you stopping the scroll? Because it's a crowded market out there. There's hundreds of thousands of coaches and consultants who are going after the same holy grail that you are, the same ideal clients, saying similar things, looking similar in their offerings. So how is it that you get to stand out and get noticed?
You mentioned also the fear that holds us back from doing things, right? Whether that's the fear of what other people will think of us, the fear that it's not perfect, the fear that we won't be liked. All of those are very real fears. And I think that it's a piece of, self-preservation because we all want to be liked. How do you work with these women to move past that fear?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, to move past the fear, you have to acknowledge that it's false, right? So that's just the first step. First, you have to acknowledge that the fear is there, because we create a bunch of excuses. I don't have enough time. I don't feel ready. I don't trust myself. I don't trust that I'll actually do the work and get it done. So fear shows up in many, many different forms. And so to get past the fear, you have to acknowledge it and go through the process of saying, is it true? And what is this doing? And what do I want to choose instead? We have agency, we have choice. And the brain is malleable, the mind is malleable. You have neuroplasticity in your thought process. So you can rewire your thinking and choose to think something else, but you can't choose to think something else or show up in a different way if you're not aware of what's already happening.
Going back to that Brene Brown, the FFT, sometimes you just have to have somebody tell you to your face that they don't like you or your product. And that's okay. You're not for everybody.
Yeah, no, you're not for everybody, but the fear will keep you from being present. It'll keep you from doing a webinar, or keep you from going live on a social media platform or being visible. And I think in today's world where it's all about visibility, that if that's your fear, if the fear is, I don't like how I look, or I don't know what to say, people might not like my message, then, or I just feel uncomfortable and I'd rather stay safe in my zone of comfort than feel uncomfortable doing something that's hard. But then again, you get to that self-confidence piece. It's the doing of it, the moving past the fear and just doing it anyway, that gives you the confidence that, hey, I didn't die. I didn't fail. No one threw tomatoes at my social media feed. It was all okay. It was all okay. And it's about tuning the dial, Erica. It's not about, oh, I didn't get it perfect the first time. I'm going to not do this anymore, or webinars don't work for me, or social media doesn't work for me. It's about having the awareness to fine tune your message, or fine tune your presence, or fine tune how you're delivering your message. And that's where getting support from coaches is really super important, of learning the skills, because corporate doesn't prepare you for entrepreneurship.
Absolutely not. And one of the most powerful messages that anyone can learn from really is choose your discomfort. You can sit there in this discomfort of staying small and being safe, or you can choose the discomfort of trying and then having massive success.
Yeah.
Get over that fear.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? Fear, you said it before, fear is always there. For me, I always say fear is sticky and it's also slippery. Once you conquer it in one area of your life, it'll just show up in a different way, in a different part. So it's the level of awareness. So, how to get in touch with the fear is start writing it out. I think the practice of morning pages is super important. Stream of consciousness, let it all out. No one ever has to read your journal. And it at least gets it out on the page so that you're not carrying it around with you all day long, right? So I'm not sure what the current stats are, but it's like something like 77% of our thoughts are negative, and 90 some odd percent of those thoughts repeat throughout the day. And so these fears and these negative thoughts are what's creating your reality, and they're getting more firmly seated. So unless you create that awareness and say, hey, I just had this thought that, that maybe I won't be good enough, in giving this talk, giving this speech. Maybe people won't like what I say. Maybe they won't applaud, maybe I won't get good ratings in the survey after the event is over. And so you can be uncomfortable pushing through those boundaries, or you could just stay miserable and complain. I remember when I was in corporate, I had a girlfriend I used to go out with all the time. And the entire conversation at dinner was we were complaining. We would just complain about our jobs, complain about our relationships. And after I went through that whole do-over and started paying attention to what I was thinking, and how that was coloring my experience and coloring my choices, then I just chose to think differently.
Absolutely. Very powerful when you shift that mindset and what you are actually verbalizing out to the world. And to talk about your journaling, I think that is such a powerful piece of it, because when you write it down, there's a bit of finality about it, right? You're taking it from your brain and you're putting it out onto the paper, creating that space in your mind for other thoughts to come in.
Exactly.
I've noticed for myself, if I don't write it down, it keeps kind of popping up in my brain because I haven't addressed it yet. I've kind of pushed it to the side, but it's still there. But when I journal and I get it out on paper and I close that book up and push it away, then I can move forward.
Yeah. Our brains are like hoarders' houses. There's like no room. Like you can't rearrange the furniture. There's no room for insight or inspiration or big ideas, because there's too much garbage taking up space. So I find that journaling first thing in the morning just kind of, it's like purging the closet where you've put all the stuff that you don't want out. And it makes space for that insight and inspiration.
It makes you more productive too.
Yeah. And it's also like having a conversation with your higher self. So after you purge, all the negative stuff that's going on, then it makes room for questioning. I love journaling by asking a question, so what is the right next step for me? What would feel good in my career right now? What is it? What is that fear that I need to overcome in order to make the next move that I need to make?
Absolutely.
And not to do it alone. There's groups of women who are are in careers and supporting each other in their career reinvention. There are coaches who work privately with people who are in a career reinvention stage. One of my clients helps women negotiate their next move in corporate, whether it's an internal promotion or going out there and getting a new job. And in multiple cases, she has helped her clients increase their compensation by six figures. 100,000 or more. Seriously. So to circle back to where we started this conversation of women don't ask for enough, we're not nearly asking for enough when it comes to promotions and compensation, switching careers or switching companies. So, and the same is true. I mean, most of my clients end up doubling their prices after we work together. And nothing bad happens. It's like nothing bad happens. No one says no, right? You would just, because there's also a price at which it's just like so low, people will question your value. Like, well, what am I going to get for that? It doesn't seem like enough based on, what's promised.
The clients that you work with, are they ever like, dang it, why didn't I do that sooner?
Yeah, of course.
Every single one of them. Well, I'm also a huge fan of looking back and reflection. So, Deb, if you were going back and 10 plus years to when you were going through your great do-over to create the great do-over, what advice would you give yourself now that you have this successful business, this podcast, and you're empowering all of these women to really live their best lives? What advice would you give?
Yeah, the advice would be don't throw away all of your previous career experience in pursuit of something new. Ooh. Because you are the compilation of everything that you've experienced in your life, every position that you've ever held, all the expertise that you've built on over the years. That's making up who you are right now. And maybe you're making a shift into being a coach or a consultant, but what makes you different than every other coach or consultant out there is your prior experience. And you have that experience because it was relevant to this next part of your journey. So when I first started, I was a life reinvention coach. I had nothing to do with launching businesses or launching service offerings or marketing or any of that stuff. It was all about how do you reinvent your life in midlife. And when I was in a high-end mastermind program that I had invested $10,000 to join for the year, it was a lot of money because I hadn't made any money at that point in my career, in my new business. And I looked around the room and I was like, you don't have a business. You don't have a business. You don't have a business. You have an idea for a business, but you really don't have a business. And that's when I realized that my background in product development and marketing and sales was so needed by women entrepreneurs. And then I made it my mission to not let women entrepreneurs fail because they didn't do the research up front. They didn't have that clarity. They were just following someone else's formula or following the direction of, oh, here's how you market something, but they didn't test and validate that idea first.
Very powerful. It also shows you too that sometimes those steps that you're taking in your journey are going to lead you to amazing outcomes that you would have never thought of originally had you not been in that room, in that mastermind with these people and said, wow, this is where I need to go now.
Yeah. And that came out in my journal. And it was at a time when my son was graduating from high school and going to college. And I was just riffing in my journal, okay, what's next? And then it just came to me. So I think it's also, the journaling is so critically important because it's how you tap into your higher consciousness and where all your inner wisdom that you already possess, but don't tap into, don't listen to, and don't follow, that's where it is. And it has been the listening to my clients, to listening to people who are in the market, understanding where they get stuck, understanding what they want most in order to be successful has been the foundation for everything that I've developed.
Amazing. Well, Deb, where can people find you if they want to connect with you or work with you or hear your podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast is Life After Corporate. So if you're curious about life after corporate, tap in there. I highly recommend you start with like episode number 1 if you're not yet an entrepreneur. If you're already in business and want to jump right into some marketing and sales advice, then jump right into the middle and where we are now. I think we just released episode number 122. And so Life After Corporate podcast on all major podcast players, thegreatdoover.com, and LinkedIn is my primary platform of choice. So connect with me on LinkedIn. Let me know that you heard me on this show, and I'll be sure to reach out and say hi.
Yay. And I will link all of that in the show notes. But Deb, thank you so much. It was such a wonderful time talking with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Erica. I'm so honored that you invited me on the show.
Thanks for listening. I absolutely loved having Deb on the show. And if you did too, please rate, review, and subscribe to the show, as you will truly help the podcast get into the hands of another woman who needs to hear it today.